Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
So welcome everybody to our 7th episode of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up. If you don't know what we're doing, then where have you been? But essentially it's myself and Ben Bolton looking at the week's news, poking a bit of fun, but also having a few interviews to uncover the challenges and opportunities in the London market. Got a packed show today. We're going to be introducing Ben Rose shortly. He's going to be one of our Pathfinder interviews, and we'll explain a bit more about that just before we start. And we've got some news as well. So let's get cracking. Ben, let's play the news jingle. News wrap-up. So they are always good. Now, last week, actually 3 weeks ago, Ben, you were complaining that you didn't have a jingle of your own. So last night, I spent 3 or 4 minutes producing this. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Go for it.
I'm not sure if I'm ready, but here we go.
Oh, that's excellent. That is, you have surpassed yourself.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes,
thanks,
you have surpassed yourself with that. Did you say how long did you spend on it? 3 or 4 minutes?
Yeah, it's a work in progress.
Good.
Anyway.
Inspired 3 or 4 minutes. I like it.
Yeah, there we go. So, news of the week this week. So it's the end of lockdown. So tomorrow the pubs open, places of worship open. We're all going to be released into the wild, and it's all perfectly clear. You can meet with other households, up to 6 people, bubbles. You can drive anywhere you want, which will be news for Dominic Cummings. And I'm looking forward to it. Can't wait.
Yeah, you going to the pub or are you going to the church?
I'm going to. I'm doing neither. I think I'll probably go to the beach, but anyway, let's see about that. My other news was that we ran a webinar looking at some of the legacy challenges in the London market. We ran a poll as part of that, which asked people, has the last 3 months made people more determined to push for change? And this is really interesting because the top 2 answers, people are now actively challenging for change, and there are pockets of change emerging. I think, firstly, very positive. You know, over 80% of people are saying that change is inevitable. But the first one, where people are actively challenging for change, I think that is something we've been talking about over the last few weeks, about that shift in mindset. And I just think that's a really encouraging poll response.
It's really interesting. The other one as well is that there's nobody has said that the pace of change is slowing.
Yeah,
which is good. I don't know what not really means. Not really. But yeah, actively challenging. And I think the question about that is, are people actually quite angry? You know, it feels like they might be, you know, look, things have to happen, you know. And we've talked a bit about whether people will move to organizations that are going to be more at the forefront of change. And therefore that's where the talent goes to, you know. I mean, they say talent follows the money, but it also, I think, follows where I think people think the action is and where the real progression is going to be, which is a real frustration with, you know, the whole of the London market. Obviously, is its speed, and I'd say if there was anything that everybody moans about over the years, it's this pace of change. You know, so if that's true, it's a big change.
Yeah. So you've got some news this week, Ben?
Obviously, I think the biggest news probably of the week was the Lemonade IPO, where perhaps to the surprise of many people, they doubled the shares. Stock was up 124% on day one. Daniel Schreiber said he's not going to get excited about it, but by saying that, he sounded excited. And so he's got 320 million now in the bank for what he describes as general corporate purposes, which is the vaguest statement on the use of $320 million. I could use $320 million for some general corporate purposes, no doubt. Anyway, whatever. So they're backed by SoftBank. I think the controversy, if there is a controversy, and there is some, is this a real tech business, or is this, another, kind of in the long line because it's backed by SoftBank? Is it another WeWork? Is it another Uber? That's what I think has been said. And there was some quite interesting comments, actually. I always like reading the comments, as you know, below the articles. And seems that I definitely recommend to people have a look at the FT and some of the insurance articles. It seems like there's quite a few people out of London Market who are quite informed, making comments. So just to sort of typify this, someone says here, Simon Kelly, insurance as an industry is stuffed full of unnecessary people, many of whom can be digitized. Tech disruption builds a better new business from the base up, hence the current valuation. The dinosaurs did not make it, and neither do most traditional companies. The only real way to express this in public investment is companies like Tesla and now Lemonade and other tech firms. If you wait until they're clearly successful, the price has acted ahead of your money. So, and then he finishes off, the market's right on Lemonade, it's going to be very valuable and insurance will be digitized. Then inevitably, everyone below that says, actually, hang on a minute, they are they're an underwriting business. They've got to show their credentials on underwriting. They're not very big, really. They've got £76 million in premium, but they're a net loss of 109 million. So this is a kind of battle of, I suppose, viewpoints. Nobody actually knows, of course, what's really going to happen. But on fundamentals, looks like, wow, that's way overpriced. But is it one of those tech things that just works? So it's really interesting.
So yeah, I can shed some light on this because I also saw the sort of them at the London Stock Exchange with their masks on, and I think they are a technology company because they look very much like Fortnite characters. I'm a massive fan of Fortnite, and I just thought, wow, this is brilliant. It's a new release, but apparently not. Yeah. But, there we go. I think you got another piece of news. Have you around the hype cycle, or is that? Yes,
that's the stat of the week. Really, this is actually. So and it prefaces, I think, what we might be talking about with Ben and I. I've been looking a bit at tech and particularly data and what's happening with data. And Gartner come out with these charts on a number of areas of related to technology and all sorts of things. But they basically look at how the hype is, so the whole kind of response to things like AI and analytics and things. And they draw out a number of trends. And these trends are listed here on the right-hand side. I won't talk about them all. People can go and look this up. It's quite interesting stuff. But there's a couple of things I just wanted to pick up. I think the first one is around this idea that they talk about augmented analytics. And this is that it's not the kind of fancy AI type ideas. It's more about machine learning that just creates much better data preparation, and that opens it up to lots more people in the organization. It isn't anymore the preserve of the data science department. Yeah. So really there's kind of this idea of less need for these highly skilled users and a proliferation, if you like, of people who deal with data. And then that leads on to the idea of digital culture that they talk about. And they say that Gartner says that data literacy will become an essential life skill, which is, you might say, well, that's hyperbole there, but actually, that could well be. And they put alongside that things which I've been quite interested in as well, which is the whole thing about digital ethics and how do organizations recognize fake news, or, once data becomes so prevalent, so ubiquitous everywhere, and everybody's using it and everybody's got access to the tools, then you've got to imagine that people are going to exploit that, for bad things as well as good. So I think that's very interesting. And then the final area, or one that really interests me, and I'm looking at, work on this, is decision intelligence. And I think this is about basically bringing together sort of traditional and advanced techniques to design and use data in all sorts of different new ways, not just correlation analysis, for example, I think is what they're saying, so that you actually get these decision models to be much better at doing what they're doing. I think that is an area where a lot of people have concern, because I think there's again a sort of tension between what's the data saying, the kind of minority report type idea that data can be used, to determine before you actually do something bad that you're a criminal. And there's some of that in here too. But also, what is our kind of qualitative input? What are the causative effects, as opposed to, just looking at data and correlations and then drawing all these conclusions, which in insurance terms may be wrong, they may be incorrect. So I think we're looking at the the explosion, if you like, of data and tools and people using it, and more people in organizations using it, becoming an essential skill, but also these quite challenging ideas or things that will change as a result of this, consequences, I think, of all of that. So it's the unintended consequences and how you deal with them. So it's an interesting report, but it's also these trends I think we should keep on looking at.
Definitely. So with that, I'll move things on and introduce Ben Rose, who is our guest of the week. Let me play the jingle. Guest of the week. Hi, Ben. What do you think of that?
That was a beautiful jingle. It did sound like a falling at the end, though, almost like with the yeah, and then a slight thud at the end. It wasn't intended, but otherwise,
I think it should build, Ben, not go off. But then, I'm not in charge of the jingles here.
No, right. Okay. Here we go. So, Ben Rose, thanks very much for coming on today. Founder and VP of Riskbook. We're going to talk to you a little bit about your experiences in the London market and try and go through your story, but also unpick some of the challenges that you might come across over the last few years. So I ask all the guests at the start of the interview, what 3 words would you describe yourself? How would you describe yourself in 3 words?
So I had some warning on this, so I've had a think, and I've gone for curious, challenging, and imaginative. On the basis that the curious pieces are kind of the what and the how, and just learning all the time about what people are actually doing and how. The challenging being more about the why, being prepared to ask really why are we doing that, and then the imaginative being a lot around why not something else, or slightly alternative concepts and visions. So those would be my 3 words. That's sort of how I tend to work and think.
Great. And how would you describe your role and how you came to be doing what you're doing now?
Good question. So as background, co-founder of Riskbook, which is a Lloyd's recognized e-placement platform for reinsurance. We're doing that at the moment for reinsurance brokers to be able to build sort of digital profiles of their risk and share it with a global audience of underwriters, with better data flowing through, etc. Getting there, I think, is quite an interesting story because it goes back a really long way in terms of how I got into that position. I actually started at Lloyd's with the Dive In Festival. Was the earliest journey. So way back in 2016, they ran a competition to see, what innovative ideas have we got floating around the market that haven't been getting attention. I bravely stood up in front of this audience and pitched my idea as a recent grad from the Lloyd's grad scheme as to why don't we have these digital profiles for risk? Because I'd grown up and I asked the audience, could they remember what they were doing back in 1991? Because I wasn't born until 1992, and everything in my life had been very digital from the beginning. I was regularly exceeding my 3,000 texts a month limit and catching up with a huge network of friends on MSN and otherwise. And when I came to London, I'd found my flat on Rightmove. I'd done all my shopping on Amazon. Very much used to using these hyper-connected marketplaces as my daily life. And I think when I'd come into the industry, it'd been like stepping into a time machine and figuring that everything was pen and paper. Why didn't I have a way as an underwriter, as I'd been at the time, to actually search and filter for the risks that I wanted? And a big part of this was this lack of a digital profile being constructed that I could actually search for. And so basically from there began a journey of finding out curiously the what and the how as to why were the risks ending up in these big piles of paper and not as digital profiles, and what tools did we need to give to brokers effectively in this case so that we could actually get to that digital profile that they could use.
And what was your just one question I did want to ask you? We didn't talk about it before, but just what was the difference between working in a kind of larger organization than running your own business? That must have been quite a shift as well. Was that exciting or just it been very challenging?
It's been wonderful. It's been the steepest learning curve you can imagine. Much like the hype curve, except it keeps on going up so far. In terms of all the different things you need to be and to do for the first time, and hopefully do well. I think you have the joy as well. So we're in the sort of venture funded startup category. So we're treading a constant line between total success and total failure. It feels like every day, in terms of, either this is going to be huge and it's going to be a huge success, or potentially it doesn't get adoption and becomes less interesting. I think we're doing a lot of things to make sure that whatever happens, we're a really useful placing tool for brokers. But in the long term, I think we've got really grand visions and excited ideas for how the marketplace could trade with not. And again, it's easy for me to jump in there and say and trade much more efficiently and at a lower cost. But actually, the vision is more around trade with much greater access between risk and capital. So using technology to really further the relationships between brokers and underwriters today, who maybe are used to trading out of habit and out of ease with the same old people every time.
I think one of the things, Ben, that frustrates me a bit is that when we hear the sort of great and the good, the leadership of the London market in particular, talking about technology, I always feel that they talk about it in isolation and they link it very much into still cost savings, which no doubt are needed. But they don't really give us a vision or lay out a vision of how the world will look once people are in these kind of more digitally enabled environments. Do you want to kind of talk about that a bit and how you see that?
Yeah, and I've actually been on the other side of that quite a bit, I think, in terms of sitting within these large firms and also consulting for a lot of reinsurers and insurers. And when you are sat as an individual in a very connected and integrated value chain, it's very hard to justify, I think, for a lot of these firms, investments in or putting time and resource behind, something that is either collaborative and might not come off if everybody works on it together, or it's just your piece.
Yeah.
Because there's so little guarantee that just your piece is going to have an impact on everybody else. I mean, prior to, so in our space, in the reinsurance, like e-placing world, we've seen year after year, decade after decade, people try to come out with sort of just a one party or a couple of parties placing platform, where this is where you come to trade with broker A, or this is where you come to trade with reinsurer 1 or 2, and so on. You quickly end up with this really fragmented environment where everybody's kind of tried to do their bit to be innovative, but quite quickly it's led to actually more chaos than you had before. So I think that's been a real barrier for a lot of innovation firms, who instead then had to look at really simple things like, how can we slightly reduce costs or slightly cut out, some duplication and automate a bit more instead.
And in that world, we were talking to Peter Clark a few weeks ago from InsurerCo. I don't know if you know him, but he was expressing his kind of frustrations as well with the speed of take up and so on. And I've done research recently, which is where I think there is a lot of kind of, I suppose, acceptance that technology is coming, but now the feeling is, what do we choose and how do we choose? Which we described as being a bit like, surfers waiting for the wave that they should be on, but lots of waves keep passing. So do you think it's coming together, or is it just still going to be a kind of fragmented environment for a while? Is Risk Exchange and Lloyd's going to solve it?
That's a really good question. I'll answer the first part last. I think the biggest issue that the Risk Exchange in London has from a reinsurance point of view for our side is that it's not global, it's London. And reinsurance is inherently a global business, and Lloyd's is a really important piece of any panel, but it's no good having to use the London solution for 20% of the business, and then the other 80% you've got to do something else for. So but it is really hard, to get to that big wave that's going to catch everyone and not leave stragglers or people being missing out on that wave. So you do see a lot of people at the moment eyeing up different opportunities and thinking, oh, is it worth us investing a lot of effort in jumping behind something like a big industry collaboration or otherwise? I think what needs to happen, and what at least we're trying to push to do in all of these spaces, is to create something that's intrinsically valuable for itself, for that participant. So there's a really good example of this in the sort of world of restaurants with OpenTable. So OpenTable, we know for it being a really helpful place to go and book a restaurant, right, as a diner. But actually, they started their proposition the other way around. They went to all of the different restaurants they could find and said, you don't have a table management software, or if you do, it's probably terrible. So how about you use ours instead? And it makes it easier. Now, if your customers call you up and book a table, you can quickly assign them to the virtual map of your tables around the restaurant. It makes it much easier. And loads of restaurants signed up, and individually, even if it was only that one restaurant using it, they were still getting a ton of value out of it. And then it was really easy off the back of that to bring on all the diners and make them able to book through the system. So I think we're trying to do something similar here, which is give brokers a really phenomenal placing tool that's going to be awesome for them and for all of their risks and save them a load of time. There's a smaller number of brokers than reinsurers. Give them that ability to connect with reinsurers, and gradually over time, hopefully have a similar sort of effect, rather than trying to say, in the sky, we think one day the market will look like this, we'll build it and they will come. Because they probably won't.
I think that's a really interesting example, the OpenTable. It brings me on to a question which is really about where do we go with the sort of customers and transparency, and how does technology help that? I think I had an interesting program of maybe about 18 months ago about restaurateurs saying, one of the things we lost, although we gained a lot with things like the software for booking restaurants, was we lost the customer touch that we had, because they did all of that, and then they had some, they said they had some issues with people would book tables and then not turn up and things like that. Now, what obviously happens, I think, is that the technology comes in quite a big wave and everybody jumps on, and then there's a bit of a sort of backtrack over, oh yes, okay, so where does the customer fit, and are the things that we lost on the human touch side as we went through that? I just wondered what you think about that with technology in the insurance market in general, because that does seem to be where the tension is, isn't it? Is that, does it really enable, or does it just kind of dumb it all down into something that becomes where you lose the people factor?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's different for every industry in terms of where people fit in and where people need to fit in. In our industry, we have in reinsurance, especially, you have relationships where you really need a multi-year level of trust. That reinsurer is still going to be there for you in 3 years, in 10 years, even if you had really bad losses in the preceding 2 or 9. And because of that, I think we can't ever replace those types of relationships, but we can use technology to enable people to build more of them and to sustain more of them, in the same way that we, with things like Facebook nowadays, are able to have way more friends than we're used to, and be able to keep in touch with them and see updates about their lives and keep track of everything that's going on. And it's not a case necessarily that suddenly you've met somebody on the internet and you're going to shift 100% of your risk program onto that random stranger. They're still going to have to become your friend and a close contact before you start, sharing all of your information and life with them. But it certainly makes it a lot easier to manage a much larger, sustained network of individuals.
Yeah. So I think what we're talking about is the way that technology enables, exactly what you described to happen in a more efficient way, but actually a richer way, because you're able to bring in to your point at the beginning, Ben, around data. You're able to bring in new sources of data that will help the transaction or whatever it is as part of that relationship that you've built up, and it would just kind of smooth the edges and just, as I said at the beginning, sort of enable it really.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick comment on that. I mean, I think that one of the things that you do see is that, often what has been presented in the past and gets presented a lot is almost the wiring diagram, and that's what everybody goes to. And I think Lloyd's has been particularly, bad at this, if it's being bad, to sort of talk about this is how it is. Now, the trouble with that is I think it's made people more accustomed to thinking that way, that's what technology is. It's just you have to kind of understand how it all operates before you can get involved with, which if you think of the mobile phone, you just don't. It's just magical and it works, and it enables you to do all those things because that has all happened in the background. And so I sense, and Ben, you should comment on this because you know more than me, but I think it feels like a lot of the people we're researching at the moment are saying, look, yeah, fine, that all the basics, all the brilliant basics just have to be done. They have to work, right? We're not going to accept stuff that doesn't work anymore. So trading systems have to work. They have to deliver. They have to get the network, but they also just have to be user friendly, and that's going to be their biggest selling point, because kind of organically we want to work with them organically, not as a sort of thing where we have to press certain buttons in a certain order.
Totally agree. And I think I mentioned the build it and they will come argument earlier around the entire industry. I think you have that even just within a single firm. And we've certainly seen firms struggle where they've built a piece of kit to try and get more data or get more efficiency, and then they've handed it off to the staff and they've all gone, I'm not using that, or I don't even know how to use that, or I'll fudge it in any way that I can to get around it. If you want to get, away from the garbage in, garbage out scenario, you've got to give people a really rich UX that's going to give them a reward for entering data. So enable them to actually engage in a way that's useful to them with a tool, but also gives them the insights back from the data that they're entering so that they see the value of doing so themselves. It's certainly something that we're focusing on a lot. We spent, before we launched, about 9 months just with our beta product with the under 35s reinsurance group and the under 40s reinsurance group, just getting people to come in and test it and give us their feedback and tell us, what do you hate about this? Is there anything that we're missing that's a real burden in your life at the moment that we could be helping to sort of smooth over and fix? And it'd be little things. It'd be like, at the moment in our admin system, I have to enter this field 10 times. Can you make it so that I just do it once and then it duplicates? Or these tiny things make such a difference, but are so often overlooked by a sort of big operational flow diagram, as you described.
Yeah, and does that therefore mean, do you think that there's going to be quite a growth in sort of UX work as well alongside all of these technologies? Because interestingly, when you talk, we ran the Lloyd's Innovation Awards for a while, and I think it was a similar thing to the dive-in, or it might have been an extension of that. But what I was one of the facilitators of the judges, and we ran, the submissions. And one of the things, the ones that always won, actually, were things that the group of judges felt were customer directed. We had so many models, so many kind of actuarial modeling tools that came in, and everybody was really nonplussed by those, because they were, as you say, they were kind of solutions in search of a problem. But when anything had been consumerized, that was really appealing. It was really interesting. Yeah,
I totally agree. I think that there's definitely a real something about technology when it changes your life for the better that means you get used to it. I remember we did an offsite, for example, in Belgrade with the team. We have a distributed remote team around the world, and so we all got together last year before lockdown, obviously, to spend some time in Belgrade. We used an Airbnb, and we were using all the digital marketplaces, and it came to using Uber to get from our Airbnb into the city. And it turns out they didn't have Uber in Serbia. And I had become so used to Uber being my way of getting around that we were completely unprepared and totally lost. That had become like a fundamental piece of technology in my life that adds so much value in the few years that it existed, that we didn't know what to do without it. I think in the end we had to find a local neighbor who could speak Serbian, who could talk to the taxi companies, and then wait on the street for when the taxi would arrive, because we couldn't even pronounce the name of the street that we were standing on. But it is possible for tech to become that valuable that it just becomes fundamental to what you do, and you can't imagine having to live without.
And you also touched on something really interesting that we were talking about last week, or Maddie was talking about, in terms of Dan Cable's work, where he does these great talks about how people take things like flying for granted, these amazing technological advances, but after a while you're just moaning about the coffee and the food on the flight, where actually you've kind of missed the whole thing of where the great progression. So I guess that's kind of what's going to happen with a lot of these technologies, is they'll be sort of taken for granted, and there'll just be a race to do more and better. And in the end, it's kind of with people, isn't it, that it matters?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's also, I guess, at some point we're going to have to shake off some of the legacy as well. There's building the lipstick on a pig argument comes to mind a lot, but building a really compelling front end on top of a ancient back end is really expensive and hard, and you're so much better off, I guess, if we can start. Again, it's always a balance, but to some extent from fresh, but still understanding what's underneath. in a way that can interact. So having a new tech stack that's built for the 2020s rather than the 2000s or before in some cases is really where we should be.
I've talked to quite a number of people in some of the new startup businesses in the Lloyd's market and who have that, essentially that new tech stack, and that's almost the first thing they always talk about, is how liberating that is. Do you think that's a real competitive edge for those organizations potentially?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it's as long as you can still communicate, as long as you're able to, be backwards compatible to some point and then have a way of, interacting. Just for us, for example, being able to use our JSON RESTful APIs and send things, in and out of Riskbook, meaning that if you've got a back office broking tool, you can build a risk there and see it populate on Riskbook and then track it back into your policy admin system without ever having to rekey anything.
Yeah.
That's so easy to do now, so quick. We can get that set up in, a few hours for a client. Whereas, trying to get the placement messages and the EBOT and ECOT type XML thing working is a different story altogether. And you have all these standards that allegedly everybody agrees to, but then when you go into anyone's organization and say, okay, so it says that you're using these standards, are you? And it turns out they've got, in reality, a different set of standards for every team within that company. We've got to move towards something better, I think.
Yeah. I think from my point of view, just working with people putting together TinTech, I think a few years ago, I think IT directors and CIOs were still trying to kind of wring out the last bits of value from the IT spend that they'd done for the previous 15 years, and they were going, we can't just replace that. But I think we have reached a tipping point where it's, as to both of your points, that it's now such a constraining influence on your organization, your capabilities, that it's now, looking at it from a risk assessment point of view, it's now too much of a risk to keep those old legacy systems than it is to try and plow on for another couple of years and save the money, sort of.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to see some real fast-paced change, I think, in the coming months. On our side, we've got new tools that are bringing the data in from the cedant right the way through to the reinsurer in the format that means they can price it right away. So we'll get to a point where if you can interact with that data coming through via API or efficiently, you can be quoting in minutes. Really running your pricing tools effectively on platform. And there's going to be some reinsurers that can do that, and there's going to be some that just fall to pieces and really struggle to do so. And I think that will suddenly have a massive impact on which markets brokers want to work with.
Because speed is so critical, isn't it, Ben? And particularly for anything that is quite commoditized, that is absolutely critical. And it seems to me that a lot of the cost is in the market is actually tied up with people trying to make that thing go faster, but they can't, obviously. But once that starts to be cracked, then you start to look at a much more potentially innovative market where they can be doing other things. But people will fall by the wayside, won't they? I think, because they'll be so exposed on that front.
There's only so long that the Excels and copying and pasting are going to hold up, I guess, in the long term.
No, you'll be. I mean, that's true now. I mean, we were looking at the US E&S market, for example, and if you can deliver some of that wholesale broking stuff, which takes so long to happen, it can be weeks before you get quotes, where actually they could be doing that in 2 or 3 seconds, from London to the US to the retail agent. That'll be a big shift.
Definitely.
An exciting one too, I think.
It is. It means people are not stuck with the drudge of the bureaucracy and the admin of those old legacy systems, isn't it? Which is the thing they always talk about that they hate.
Definitely. Well, Ben, thanks ever so much for coming on this week and sharing your insights and stories of Riskbook and the London market. So thanks ever so much. Perhaps you can come back in the future in a few weeks' time. We can kind of revisit some of this stuff and see how things are moving forward.
Yeah. When you're a bit older, Ben,
I need my own jingle.
When you're a bit older, because you're unfeasibly young, and we're going to keep on saying every time you come on, I'm going to say, and Ben is a bit older than last time he came on.
If you do me a jingle as well, then I'll be happy to do that.
Fine.
Okay, good. Right, thanks, Ben. Good weekend.
Thanks,
cheers, bye.
Yeah, cheers, Ben. Thank you very much.
I really enjoy that. In fact, it's so refreshing to talk to people who've got ideas and a bit of vision. As we were talking about last week, so good, isn't it? Rather than getting bogged down in the same old issues around legacy or whatever else.
Absolutely, and those are the people we want to talk to. There are a lot of them, I think, and I don't always think they get as much of a voice in the market.
Yeah,
so,
defo. Okay,
here.
So last up, weekend activities. What have you got on, Ben?
I think I'm going out. It's going to rain tomorrow. I'm not doing tomorrow. I'm going to stay in. I'm going out. I'm cycling, I think, on Sunday. That's it. Not much. Not a lot.
I think we're going to the beach. I think we're going to. There's a long stretch of beach in Kent, and we're going to take the dog down there and do some walking. So
we're able to go on holiday soon, aren't we? So we could next week talk about our holiday plans.
Indeed.
Yay.
So, on that note, we'll say goodbye, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Burgess and Bolton's Weekly Wrap Up.